Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. Over the last couple of years, Marvel Comics has made efforts to diversify its catalog of characters by adding more characters of color. And they were making these efforts to do this because many people in groups such as social justice warriors and other groups were complaining that Marvel Comics doesn't make efforts to include enough characters of color or enough efforts to add diversity to its universe of characters. Unfortunately, when efforts were made by Marvel Comics to add more diversity to its ranks by changing major characters into characters of color, this led to one of the worst sales slumps in the company's history. 2016 had one of the worst sales slumps at Marvel Comics due to efforts to try to add diversity to the ranks of the Marvel Universe. And the big problem with this attempt at diversity is that it was just executed poorly. Now, I'm a guy who is all for diversity in comic books. I want to see more characters of color, and as a creator of a character of color and a universe filled with characters of color, I want to see characters who have the content of substance, not just some character who is a character of the same name of a white character with a different ethnicity slapped on it. So when I saw characters like the Miles Morales Spider-Man, the Asian Hulk, the Pakistani Miss Marvel, the black female Iron Man, and Sam Wilson as Captain America, I didn't see anything of substance there to make me want to go out and buy those books. All I saw was a person of color in a white man's shoes. And that doesn't lead to really good reading. All that leads to is a shallow reading experience and a really poor attempt at diversity that is in some ways passive aggressive, because it's passive in the way that you're getting a character of color, but aggressive in the way that you're giving me a character of color in a way that does not really show us what makes this character distinct or gives us an incentive to care. Basically, this character is a token and has no substance, no depth, and nothing that will appeal to a base of readers. And what Marvel Comics did in their attempts to diversify their audience was they alienated their core customer base. And the core customer base for comic books, as I see it over the last 50 years, has been white males. And the reason why white males like buying comic books is because they related to those characters, they identified with those characters, and they wanted to see their heroes in these comics. They wanted to see Bruce Banner as the Hulk. They wanted to see Thor being a man. They wanted to see Iron Man being Tony Stark. They wanted to see Steve Rogers as Captain America. This is what was established from the day of inception for those characters, and this is what they were used to seeing all the time. They wanted to see those characters having fantastic adventures, not a bunch of affirmative action superheroes just placed there because of their color. And it's that whole content of character versus color that is what led to the sales slump. Because when it came down to many of these characters, they were not crafted well, they were not written with any sort of care. They were just characters of color there for the sake of being characters of color. And when you're running a business, you're running a business for a profit. This is something that many of the social justice warriors who complained about Marvel Comics just don't understand as it relates to business. A lot of them are sitting there, they were complaining, oh, Marvel doesn't have enough diversity and they don't create enough characters of color. But when Marvel made efforts to change its catalog, many of these same people who were social justice warriors and detractors, what they did is they didn't show up to go buy those comics. I mean, there were trade paperbacks on Amazon, didn't get sold. There were comics at the comic shop that didn't get sold. And meanwhile, these guys were sitting online complaining, whining, and arguing about the lack of diversity at Marvel Comics. However, when this company spent millions of dollars changing its catalog to appeal to a larger audience of readers, the main audience that complained the most, these were the people who just didn't show up. So, what incentive does Marvel Comics have to continue diversifying its catalog when many of the complainers, just didn't show up with their money in hand. That's the big problem with a lot of social justice warriors and a lot of detractors, is that they don't understand that publishing is a business. And in business, people are going to create products that are sold, and they only are going to make the products that have the biggest demand. And when we look at Marvel Comics, the biggest demand these days comes from white males. And they are the ones who are, as I see it, every Wednesday going down to that comic shop with $100 in hand, going to that comic book store to give that comic owner for those comics. So that's the only thing that's going to give that comic owner an incentive to go out and buy more Marvel comics. If it doesn't sell on his shelf, he isn't going to order it. And that's the main reason why he's not going to order it, is because these comics are non-returnable, and he takes a loss on every comic that doesn't sell. So a lot of these comic shop owners, they were taking a bath on these affirmative action superheroes. A lot of people were complaining and saying they wanted this, but they just wouldn't show up. And when I look at Marvel Comics, they're not in a position to really take a big loss like that, especially when you look at the bigger picture of the comic book industry, which has been in a major sales slump for over 30 years. If the sales had gotten even lower than this, what would have happened is Marvel Comics, even though they are part of Disney, would have been in dire straits. And when you look at your sales and they're not really, books aren't moving, as a publisher, you're forced to make a decision, either to start canceling books or to just scrap the entire universe and go into full reprint mode and then just move on, because there is no customer base. Again, when you are selling comic books or any publication, you are going to go with the customers who have money in their pockets. The people who put money on the table are the people you're going to listen to. And what Marvel Comics did that was the biggest mistake of all was listening to those people who didn't put any money on the table. Now, I've run into this myself with the SJS Direct Publishing imprint. A lot of people, they would sit there like these hoteps and these pro-blacks. They were just like the social justice warriors. They would complain to me about the ISIS series. They would complain about the covers. Then I would go out and hire professionals like Bill Walker to design covers, and these same people would still complain, not putting a single dollar on the table. So I understand what Marvel Comics is going through over the last year, because I've been going through it myself. And a lot of these detractors, you try to appeal to them, you try to make efforts to help them out, and you're making efforts to expand your audience. However, the audience has to come to the publisher when they are making efforts to go out here and reach them. In order for us to create more products, we need to see the money on the table. And I look at Marvel Comics, they don't see the money on the table, so they are going to make efforts to go back to white males, because the white males are primarily out here spending their money. They're the ones who go to a store like a Jim Hanley's Universe or a Midtown Comics, and they're going to put down $400 or $500 bills every month on comics. And that comic shop owner, yeah, he's going to go out here and appeal to those people because he's seeing those titles move on the regular. This is just basic supply and demand, and this is something many social justice warriors, many pro-blacks, and many hoteps just don't understand about business. You're going to go and you're going to sell products that are going to get demand. You're not going to create products that have no demand at all. And this is what Marvel Comics, the hard lesson they have learned regarding diversity. And the sad part is that we saw what happens when you do diversity the wrong way. Now, I am a proponent for diversity. I do believe we do need more characters of color, but I believe the way Marvel Comics executed diversity was one of the core reasons it failed, because what they were trying to do was slap an ethnicity on a major character and then hope people would just go out and pick that character up, not giving these readers any sort of character to relate to, not giving these readers any sort of character to identify with, and not showing us why this character is distinct, and most importantly, not giving us a reason to care. And anybody who's a professional writer understands you have to give a reader a reason to care in order to keep reading that character's adventures. And in many cases, they didn't give us a reason to care. And in the case of some of the female characters, they wouldn't let the character go through a full character transformation arc where we saw this character going through any hardship because, again, the social justice warriors don't want to see women being so-called abused. But when you have a character transformation arc, characters suffer, they lose, they fail, and that's what leads to the character growing to become the hero people relate to and identify with because they are going through these struggles, they're going through these obstacles, and they're overcoming these obstacles. But many of these groups don't understand this, and because they do not understand this, they don't understand that that hero's journey is paramount to selling comics. If the hero doesn't go through any journey, we really don't care about them. And in many cases, when it comes down to many of these diversity heroes, we got characters like Riri Williams, who pretty much knew everything that Tony Stark did, basically making her a Mary Sue. And that's not a good character, for readers to see. Yes, she's a black female Iron Man, but she never went through any of the hardships that Tony Stark went through, such as going through that jungle and getting blown up and then trying to have to find a way to keep himself alive and then fight off these terrorists in the Iron Man movie, but the Viet Cong in the comic book. And that's not really giving people much incentive to continue buying the adventures because a Mary Sue pretty much can beat anyone, and that's no challenge for the reader. Readers want to see characters overcoming obstacles, they want to see them overcoming challenges, and they want to see them overcoming the adversity. And that's what endears people to their stories, and that's what makes people want to share their stories with readers. Now, I look at this whole diversity thing from the panoramic perspective, and when I look at it, I look at a major attempt that Marvel made in the 1980s, back with the Avengers. Now, I remember back in the 80s with the Avengers, there was an attempt to diversify that team, and the writers really made a brilliant statement on it because in the storyline, they made it where Henry Peter Gyrick and the government took control of the Avengers, and they decided who was going to be on the roster. And they picked all the core characters like Iron Man, Captain America, the Vision, the Scarlet Witch, the Wasp, and instead of Hawkeye, they decided they were going to put the Falcon on the team for diversity. And in that storyline they were doing in the Avengers from about 190 to about 195 of Volume 1, the Falcon was on the team. Unfortunately, the Falcon really wasn't a good fit because the Falcon was a street superhero. He was the guy who fought street guys. And the guy he replaced, Hawkeye, he was an expert marksman, and he had a lot of seasoned experience going on in outer space, going and taking on all sorts of bad guys. And they decided they were going to replace this seasoned guy, Hawkeye, with Falcon, who was a street superhero. And it wasn't a good fit. Falcon felt awkward. Falcon felt out of place. And then as the roster changed around about the 210th or 211th issue, or even before then, I think he left before then, he decided to leave because he didn't feel like he was a good fit for the team. And what they were making the statement was back then in the 1980s was saying that, you can't force diversity. And I look at Marvel Comics 30 years later or 40 years later, and we clearly see again that you can't force diversity. Diversity in comics has to be something organic. And the reason why it has to be organic is because this character who you were creating has to have something distinct that makes people relate to them, makes people identify with them, and makes people connect to them. Now, I think of characters who were done well, that diversify a universe. I think of DC Comics' Mr. Terrific. Now, the original Mr. Terrific was a white guy, but Michael Holt was just such a great character. He was just such a great character that he actually added more to the modern DC universe as Mr. Terrific. He made major contributions, and he was such a formidable character. He was on the level of Batman in the DC universe and Black Panther in the Marvel universe. So he had things of substance to him that enabled readers to connect with him. And I also think about other characters such as the Milestone characters. They had things that were distinct. I mean, characters like Static, yes, he had electrical superpowers, but it's other aspects of him, such as being the teenager who was going through the struggles of being a black teenager. That was something distinct about him. Then I think about Icon, who was a black conservative, a guy who went through slavery, a guy who went through racism, and pretty much his reasons for becoming a hero, his relationship with Rocket, all that was what made those characters distinct. So there has to be more than color whenever you're creating a character. I know this firsthand because as a creator of characters like Isis and John Haynes and Easting, I have to make characters that have substance to them and have more to them than just being a black character. They have to have, elements in them that make you care about them. With the Isis character, I made her a goddess next door, a friend to the black community who makes efforts to help out the black community. Now, with the John Haynes character, I made him, a guy who is in this corporate hell and is trying to overcome Lucifer and his legion. And with the Eastine character, I wanted to create this devilish diva who was out having the humorous adventures while she continued building her relationship with Christ. Now, the big problem with diversity in the comic book industry isn't that there aren't enough characters of color. The really big problem is there aren't enough creators of color being hired at places like Marvel Comics and DC Comics. And because there aren't enough creators of color in these places, this is one of the core reasons why many of these attempts at diversity are often so shallow and poorly executed. Because the people who would understand how to create a great character of color like myself, we're not the ones getting hired to create these characters of color. In many cases, we have white males like Brian Michael Bendis going out and creating a black female Iron Man and then saying that this is diversity, when a black creator like myself will look at that and say, that's not diversity, that's just a poorly crafted character, basically a Mary Sue, so that Brian Michael Bendis can pretty much write the type of Iron Man stories he wants without having to actually do the research and work on the character. That's not diversity at all. In order to get real diversity in the comic book industry, we really need more writers of color. And we really need writers who understand the craft of comic books. Now, I look at Marvel Comics' attempts to try to add diversity, and they failed miserably because they got two people who really do not understand the Marvel Universe. They made an attempt at diversity by hiring National Book Award winning writer Ta-Nehisi Coates to write Black Panther. And then they went out and hired Roxane Gay to be a writer of a Black Panther spin-off book. Both books are struggling right now because they went out and hired two popular black writers. They just didn't hire people like myself who understand the Marvel Universe. Again, they looked at the color of their skin and part of their acclaimed backgrounds, but they didn't ask the hard questions about, has this person read a Marvel comic? Does this person know the characters? And does this person, done the research on these characters to understand, how to write that character in a way that it stays true to who that character is? Because I look at somebody like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote Black Panther, and he decided he was going to take a black feminist perspective on Black Panther, and that pretty much made the book, it alienated a lot of the black comic fans who bought Black Panther, and it alienated many of the non-black fans because they didn't like the whole idea of T'Challa being this passive guy who was sitting there and not being active, because that's just not his character. If we look at somebody like Christopher Priest, who understood Black Panther, this was a guy who knew the character, and he wrote stories about a Black Panther who was an active superhero and actively politically involved. When I look at the Ta-Nehisi Coates run, he really didn't understand the character, and he was trying to push, liberal social justice on Black Panther and project that onto him, and that really wasn't a good fit for the character. And whenever you want to add diversity to a business like Marvel Comics, again, you have to look at hiring writers of color, but you also have to look at their backgrounds and to see if they are qualified to do this. And this is one of the main reasons why this big push for diversity failed miserably, was that it was just overall, all around executed very poorly. If you want to add diversity, you really have to, one, think about creating new characters from creators that are of color, and two, you have to think about what they're going to add to the Marvel Universe. Three, you have to think about why we should care about those characters and why they should be important. And then four, you have to think about hiring people who are qualified to go out here and create quality comic books that will bring in readers of all races and all ethnicities, because what really sells a comic book is the story. If the stories just aren't good, then the readers have no incentive to buy those comics on the regular. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.